to my right is the old depot.
Today, I am getting out of the house and visiting places in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where strange, sometimes violent, and sometimes tragic things have happened.
So we're going inside?
If you go into the old train depot in downtown Cheyenne, you can walk through the lobby where the passengers once waited to catch the train.
The inside looks like The Shining.
I'm not just being facetious. The big echoey room that once was where passengers waited for trains has geometric designs on the walls that do sort of look like the ones used on the set of the Overlook Hotel in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
And then it was just off to my left here. They say just east of the magazine stand was where the crime happened.
Perry Carroll had killed his boss in the middle of the depot in Cheyenne in front of about 500 people.
That's Mark Setright, who you've heard before if you listen to the show a lot. On this episode of That Doesn't Happen Every Day, in which we interview everyday people about things that don't normally happen every day, I give you a tour of my own town, but instead of going to the major landmarks, I'm taking you to the little places where I've heard rumors of tragedy or violence or the just plain unusual happening, to take a deeper look at all of the things I'd heard about but never stopped to really look into before.
Do you know where the former railroad employee shot the superintendent? Was it here?
That's me again in the depot downtown, bothering someone in an otherwise empty lobby. The guy I ask has no idea what I'm talking about.
What they say is a disgruntled railroad employee shot his boss.
Here's what happened according to the news articles I've included in the description. In 1935, a man named Paul, often called Perry, last name Carroll, was a railroad worker who'd recently been fired. He walked into the depot, approached one of the railroad supervisors named C.C. Bernard, who was talking with someone either at a magazine stand or a cigar stand or both, and shot him 3 times in the head, about where I was standing, give or take. It's unclear exactly how many people saw it, but Perry made no effort to hide what he was doing. Instead, he simply turned the gun on himself and shot himself in the chest, falling next to his victim. It's weird to stand in a place where something like that happened, but unlike a lot of other murder scenes, there's no marker or plaque or anything to denote what happened. It also makes me wonder what might have happened but remained unmarked in some of the other old buildings or places I visited or lived in. Perry Carroll didn't die from what happened that day, though, at least not right away. He actually recovered from his self-inflicted gunshot wound and then was convicted of the murder. And that's where the story gets even more strange. 30 years before Perry Carroll became a convicted murderer, another man named Tom Horn also became a convicted murderer. Only about a half mile from where Perry would commit his crime in the 1930s, Tom Horn was executed in Cheyenne, and it was on a strange device called a Julian gallows. The Julian gallows was set up so after a condemned person was ordered to stand on a trap door, water would start to drain out of it, and eventually some sort of mechanism inside the gallows would make the trapdoor fall and hang the condemned person. The idea was that no one would have to pull a lever or anything, and it was considered more humane for the people that were carrying out the execution because all you would have to do was direct the condemned person where to stand. Sometime after Tom Horn was executed on the Julian gallows in Cheyenne, it was shipped west to Rawlins, Wyoming, to the penitentiary there, where years later it awaited the arrival of Perry Carroll, the man who shot C.C. Bernard in the train station in Cheyenne. But
Wyoming was looking for something less painful, more humane, and so they switched to cyanide gas. It was the first used in Nevada in 1924.
Perry would receive a dubious kind of celebrity. He missed out on dying on the same gallows that executed Tom Horn and became the first person to face Wyoming's brand new gas chamber.
But it's pretty controversial.
A 1937 article by Oscar Chafe described what happened to Perry. Perry Carroll walked calmly to a seat in the death chamber at 12:16 o'clock, his face set in determined lines. He paid no attention to the gallery of officials and newspapermen who peered intently at him through the cell windows. He was followed by guards who fastened straps around his arms, legs, and chest, despite his last-minute request that no fastenings be used. A blindfold was placed over his eyes. The heavy steel door of the cell was barred. Warden McPherson pulled a lever, which plunged the cyanide eggs into the acid. As the white vapor rose in the cell, his last noticeable movement occurred at 12:24 a.m. Ironically, C.C. Bernard, the man who was murdered in the train station where I was standing, actually ascended to the position he held with the railroad on the day of someone else's death. 2 years earlier, a different employee of the railroad attacked 2 other employees of the railroad because he had been fired. I want to make it clear also that C.C. Bernard had nothing to do with those attacks. The new job he got wasn't to replace one of the men that was attacked. By coincidence, he happened to ascend to the position he had on the same day. This other killer was named Keith Belair, and only one of his victims died. The attack did happen in Cheyenne. Newspapers say that the 2 victims worked in the store department, so it's unclear where that was. That previous attack had happened on Friday the 13th, and Perry, the one who killed C.C. Bernard, was executed on Friday the 13th. Unlike Perry, though, Keith Belair, the one who shot 2 and killed 1, was not sentenced to death, but sent to Wyoming State Hospital in Evanston. A July 20th, 1934 article even said that he escaped from the mental hospital and kind of wandered around town for 24 hours before he was captured again. I don't have any other information about what eventually happened to Keith Belair. As I walk out of the train station to my car, you have to wonder if Perry Carroll was shipped to Rawlins for his execution by train, and if he was walked through the very same lobby where he had committed murder only about a year or so before. If that was the case, did he look at the spot on the floor where he killed someone and then tried to kill himself? Or did he not give it a glance?
We're turning left, waiting for some pedestrians.
I leave the train station and head north just 2 blocks, crossing over Lincoln Way. Lincoln Way got its name from the Lincoln Highway, which at one time was America's first transcontinental motor route. Eventually, it would make the train station just a block away more or less obsolete, at least for passenger travel anyway. I turn left on 17th Street and then park in front of one of the downtown buildings.
Just kind of to the left, like barely noticeable, is a small door, and it says Knights of Pythias. Knights of Pythias were, I think, kind of like a lot of the different, fraternal organizations. But it is a fact that a few years back, they found the body of a teenage girl, at least her skeleton, I believe, in a coffin under the stage up there.
According to one article I've linked in the description, the body was found back in the 1990s. Jill Pope's book, Haunted Cheyenne, said that at the time a man was cleaning up around the stage upstairs when he discovered a trap door. After opening it, he crawled down in under the stage and found an old casket. He called for help, and the casket was opened, and inside was the body of a 15-year-old girl. The remains were given to a funeral home, and the coffin was kept, and Jill's book said that those remains had been in there for 50 years. I remember hearing the story about this girl being found not far from the steakhouses and boutiques of downtown. However, after starting this podcast, the story of the remains in the old Knights of Pythias building aren't quite as freaky as I thought they would be. So first, a bit of history. The Knights of Pythias were founded in 1864 as a fraternal organization, sort of like, but not the same as, the Masons or the Oddfellows or a lot of the other groups that were around at the time. Louis Armstrong and Franklin D. Roosevelt were both members, and even Abraham Lincoln apparently really liked the Knights of Pythias and thought that the good values that they were teaching could help heal the country after the Civil War. I want to make it clear that I am not a member of the Knights of Pythias, and I don't know exactly why they had the coffin, but from what I could find out about the Knights of Pythias and a lot of other fraternal organizations at the time, sometimes things like skeletons were used in ceremonies to remind people that they too would one day die, and that making good choices and living a moral life was very important. In fact, I've linked a few of the countless articles in the description of people discovering real and fake skeletons in old Oddfellows halls. Again, I am lumping a lot of different groups and different practices together, but I do think that after all these years of hearing that story about the skeleton found in there, the reason why it was there might not be as sinister or as scary as people have made it out to be. Again, I am making some assumptions as an outsider, though. So now we're going to go ahead and leave the Knights Pythias Hall for, well, a castle. A lot of the nice old homes in Cheyenne are north of Pershing in the avenues, but by all accounts, as Cheyenne was kind of getting going, there was what was called Millionaire's Row, and that's where we're headed to now. The following information comes from an article by Andy Jasperson. In the 1870s, a man named A.H. Swan moved to Wyoming, and by the 1880s, he had over 100,000 head of cattle, and with all of that wealth, he wanted to build a castle as a wedding present for his daughter in Cheyenne. I don't know, when someone builds your fiancé a castle, what you're then supposed to give them as a wedding present, or, well, what the expectations are on you now. Unfortunately, between 1886 and 1887, Wyoming and a lot of the western states saw one of the worst winters they had on record, and A.H. Swan lost a ton of cattle and a ton of money, so he couldn't finish building the castle for his daughter. Around that time, a claimed postal clerk, druggist, hardware dealer, photographer, and sign maker named David D. Dare bought the castle for $30,000, which at the time was almost $1 million, and finished building it. The castle in Cheyenne had gold doorknobs and mahogany ceilings, and even marble wash basins in 3 separate bathrooms. And to top it all off, it really did look like a castle. Up front, it had turrets with the conical roofs, and towards the back, it had, like the little battlements and places where you would have shot arrows out of if it had been a real medieval castle. David Dare was part of the establishment of the Cheyenne National Bank and then moved to San Diego, California, where he opened the California National Bank. He also moved into a new castle called Villa Montezuma, which he bought from the original owner. I arrive at what used to be Millionaires Row, but now is just another business district downtown. So I'm stopped at the light here at the corner of 19th and Cary. I don't really want to get out because it's pretty windy and cold even for today. One corner I think has the courthouse. Another has some businesses that are, old red bricks. So I imagine they didn't replace anything, but kitty corner to each other, straight across the intersection, are 2 very, very big parking lots. And where people now park, that SUV or that F-150, you used to have a castle. Just to clarify, there are 2 parking lots at that intersection. I'm not sure which one was the site of Castle Dare. So what happened to Cheyenne's only castle? In 1891, Dare said that he had poor health and that a better climate was needed, so he got on a boat headed for Italy. Then, almost immediately after, his bank wasn't able to pay several large withdrawals. The California National Bank closed, and so did the Cheyenne National Bank. In fact, the Cheyenne Bank's clerk committed suicide soon after. David Dare, the king of the castle in Cheyenne and one in San Diego, had made off with $200,000. According to the internet, that was over $6 million back then. Dare was never caught. Some said he tried to build a railroad between Jericho and Jerusalem in 1893. Some said that he had a streetcar company in Alexandria, Egypt in 1900. And there were rumors that he had died in an Armenian street brawl. But other information says he probably died in Athens, Greece in 1909. After our only king died, his castle became a boarding house, and then a funeral parlor, and then an Oddfellows Lodge until 1963. And then people decided to make it, very, very big parking lots. Despite the terrible reign of King David Dare, I still wish that castle was there. True to the fashion of the podcast, this next part gets a little bit weird as I go from where the castle used to be to Holiday Park. What is straight in front of me is a playground, like a modern playground with the plastic slides and everything, and it has turrets on it that look like a castle, but all around the playground is a low wall, like maybe 18 inches, made of big, heavy stones, and then at the corners of the wall are kind of turrets that are probably up to your chest. Here in the park, I'm next to these turrets. These rocks around a kid's playground that looks like a castle were taken from, as real as you can get in America, a castle. Well, Cheyenne's castle is gone. You can still visit Villa Montezuma in San Diego, and I'll link more about that in the description. Our final stop is the Lakeview Cemetery. A lot of people who've had an impact on Wyoming's history are buried here, from Nellie Taylor Ross, who was Wyoming's first female governor, to John Portuguese Phillips, who made a famous ride from northern Wyoming down to Fort Laramie to report that an entire company of soldiers had been wiped out in a battle with native warriors. Tom Horn is not buried there, but the 14-year-old boy who he was convicted of killing, Willie Nickel, is. I'm not going to look at any of those graves, though.
Here's one of my favorite gravestones. It looks like a backwards C made out of stone, a letter C. And then inside of it is a dream catcher. And then down at the bottom is a plaque. And it says, "Grandmother and grandson returned to Earth, June 11, 2004. In November 2003, a Native American woman and her grandson were unearthed at a construction site in South Cheyenne. Now they rest in peace here."
I've always looked at this grave with, I guess, a sense of mystery. It bothers me that we don't know more. However, a news article written by Juliet Rule from 2004 surprised me with how much information they were able to find out. A lot of the following information comes from Juliet's article, and I really think she deserves a shout out. Speaking of the woman interred in the Lakeview Cemetery, it says, "She was an Indian woman married to a white man, widowed by the time she was buried a few hundred yards from where Crow Creek flows today. She was old enough to remember the American Civil War, old enough to remember peace on the plains. Her makeshift grave, dug near immigrant trail crossings in 1865 or so, held those and other secrets until it was raised in November by an earth mover leveling land for a subdivision in South Cheyenne." I wondered how they knew that she had been married and that it was to a white person, but apparently she was found wearing a copper ring on her left ring finger, which, as the article put it, meant she had probably married outside of her tradition. Another interesting thing that the article pointed out was the condition of her teeth. According to the article, the diet of a lot of Native Americans on the plains was really coarse, and it was really hard on their teeth. Euro-Americans heading west brought their softer diet with them on the trails. One of the men who studied her remains said that based on the condition of her teeth, she had probably started to eat what most Euro-Americans ate 15 to 20 years before her passing away. Given that she was between 52 and 59 years old, the small child found next to her would likely have been her grandson. Evidence from his bones also suggests that he was white. Also with the bodies was an oak sewing box, a fistful of calico buttons, and a pair of scissors caked with corrosion.
And you can see people have left stones on the grave, and there's a stick here with string or pipe cleaners, and it looks like beads wrapped around it, and there's feathers and stuff. So she wasn't forgotten.
I'm not completely sure what the point of this episode was. When I'd left the train station in true Wyoming fashion, the guy I had asked about the murder there said that he was sorry that he didn't know about it.
That's all right.
I mean, I guess you could argue that's maybe part of why I made this episode, is to remind people of what has happened sometimes right in their front yard, but also maybe like some member of some fraternal organization. It's a way for me to remind myself of my own mortality, that life is fleeting, and you never know what might happen to it, even in the most mundane or normal of places. Thank you for listening to this episode of That Doesn't Happen Every Day. I've linked Andy Jasperson's book, 100 Things to Do in Cheyenne Before You Die, and I'm thankful for what she shared that helped make this show possible. I also want to give a shout out to Jill Pope's book, Haunted Cheyenne, which I've also linked in the description. Please check them out. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can listen to all past episodes of That Doesn't Happen Every Day by doing a search for That Doesn't Happen Every Day. Every day is 2 words in this case, podcast, and you can listen to every episode I've done in the past completely for free. Shout out to KHOL and Jackson for playing this show. I hope to have another episode to you in about 2 weeks.